Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Roon Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome back to the show the one and only Peter Gray. Peter is an author, speaker, and half of the occulture-defining publishing house Scarlet Imprint. Peter joins us today to talk about his latest book, The Two Antichrists. This means we go into Jack Parsons' influence on science fiction and science fiction's influence on Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard's fascination with Aleister Crowley, and some of the ways he out-Crowleyed the beast himself in many respects. Also magical individualism, the future of witchcraft, and by extension, possibly the future of all life itself, both on and off planet. Enjoy. Peter, congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Gordon. It was a pleasure to get this one written.
Yeah, it has that sense. And funny is I'm reading through it. Here's my first thought. Here we are in 2021. And you wrote a space book for Scarlet Imprint, and I wrote an eco book.
Yeah,
and I'm like, yeah.
I thought we did. I thought we just talked for a moment.
Exactly. If we get a lot of returns, we'll just hand them one of the other ones and send it back.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do. Yeah. No,
you go.
I think it's interesting. We're both trying, I think, to do something at the fringes of magic and to push things forward. So it's very useful to have the interchange of ideas, and I think it's inevitable that my work's going to be influenced by some of the directions that you've been going in, and I assume that some of my work will have influenced you as well.
Very much so. It's this one in particular. I can kind of see it has the same, this is a very difficult thing to describe. It has the same awareness that history is like a flow and a current with some kind of telos, and not like a dumb machine telos like dialectical materialism or something, but there are like coils of history that you can pick up. And I really resonated with that in this book.
Yeah, I think we're also at a moment in history where we can start to change things. And so for me, this was very much a it's a series of spells as a book, although it appears to be a series of like brief chapters and a central driving thesis. My intention with the book is to move history and to move history at this particular moment, as we are pivoting towards space in an extremely dramatic way, in a more dramatic way than I've seen in living memory.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so my first question was going to be why this book now, and that I guess is half of it, right? So
yeah,
it's an opportunity to at least, I would say, to begin with, to bring a how to describe this, a better understanding of the history of 20th century European magic to a wider awareness, so that it can be used to change. Because this is the thing that I really liked about it, is that you can step into a living current, and most people don't realize that. They don't realize that there is that thing.
Yeah. I mean, my sense in going back and reassessing the Jack Parsons material is that the Babalon Working, rather than like birthing a variety of outcomes, also shut a lot of things off. Particularly with the impact of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, I think magic stopped thinking about the future in quite a dramatic fashion. And I think a lot of the stopping thinking about the future can be dated to what went wrong with the Babalon Working, and how Hubbard managed to capture this forward scientific vision of things, and how the traditional approaches, particularly with Thelema, failed to adapt to the future. So the book was critical now because we can see some major changes occurring within the magical sphere. One of which is that the Crowley copyrights have expired, which means that what was previously very much a closed system is now becoming open source, whether the people who own that, who believe they own the tradition at the moment, want it or not. That change is happening. And I also think that Scientology is in the process of disintegrating. So the church has very much become a real estate cult. Clearly they have power and influence, but in terms of being a live movement, that's starting to loosen off. So my desire with the book was to go back and to find the lacunae within the Babalon working, and to open those up again, and also ultimately to liberate Jack once more, because I think the liberation of Jack Parsons and the release at the end of his work still hasn't been fully accomplished.
No, definitely with you on that. I want to go back to something you said about, well, we should actually talk about the thesis. So if it is a series of spells, I have questions about several of them, but the two Antichrists. So the thesis of the book in a sentence, if you had to pitch it, I guess.
Okay, in a sentence, people have concentrated on the early stages of the Babalon working, the work that Jack did with which produced Marjorie Cameron, and the initial stages of the Enochic working. And as a result, they've neglected the Antichrist workings that Jack produced later in his life. But the thesis of the book is more radical than simply discussing Jack as Antichrist. It goes into the effect of the Babalon working on L. Ron Hubbard, and the fact that Hubbard, as very few people have noticed, because occultists tend not to look at Scientology, that Hubbard declared himself Antichrist as well. So the two Antichrists of the title of the book refers to both Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, both of whom are sort of the bastard children of Thelema.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, one of the things that I liked in the book, we're calling it Babalon working now, but as you kind of point out, I think we should begin there. It's better understood as workings if we want to move into this space of looking at its after effects and the things that it itself birthed, right? Like that series of workings. It was actually it was bigger than going out into the desert.
Yeah. I think most people see Jack's life as being telescoped into a very, very narrow period. So there's a feeling that Jack called Babalon, everything went wrong, Hubbard ran off with all of his money, Jack went up in flames, which is really to collapse what were three initial workings that Jack carried out. So the first working was the Enochian elemental working, which was designed to bring him a lover, and that lover was to replace Sarah Northrop, who'd run off with Hubbard, and Jack was obviously in a terrible state. So they began their work together to do a simple piece of Enochic magic, which I talk about in Strange Suppers and Spells Diverse, which is an essay which is available online and also in the Brazen Vessel. So that was the initial working. Then that developed because Jack went into the desert and received a book, Libra 49, which is what Jack saw as the fourth book completing Crowley's Book of the Law. So there's the first working, elemental Enochian. Second working produces a magical book in the desert. Then they return and do another Enochian working, calling the seventh heir, and they do a 3-day ritual to birth Babalon. So that's the first Babalon working, which takes place in 1946, in a period from the 4th of January to the 3rd of March. And that's where most people have concentrated their kind of fire, looking at that piece. Hubbard then leaves in May 46 and runs off with Jack's money in the Allied Enterprise yacht scam, where Parsons paid for a yacht. Hubbard stole it, then Parsons invokes Bartzival and has the yacht driven back to shore, and everything goes wrong. And after that, kind of like Crowley, Jack drops out of the Babalon work for about 2 years when his life kind of gradually disintegrates, and he returns to the Babalon working in 1948 with an Antichrist working, and the Antichrist working has really not been talked about very much, and people assume that Jack then immediately dies. But what actually happens is we have a period that the Babalon working begins in 1946, 4th of January, and then it's only in 1952 that Jack dies. So it isn't the goddess appears, Jack dies. It's the goddess appears through a series of workings and produces something unknown. Jack's life disintegrates. Then Jack does a second Antichrist working, which is pretty much a solo working, and then he puts his life back together again. Rather than seeing Jack as being this tragic figure who is unable to do magic effectively, who skips all the steps, what a careful analysis of the documentation reveals is that Jack was a very careful magician, and not only was he a careful magician, he managed to survive perhaps the most difficult part of the thelema, which is the ordeal of the abyss. Not only did he survive the ordeal of the abyss, he spent several years doing extremely productive work afterwards, when his mind was clear, when his life was going together, when he was preparing his work. And it was only then that the tragic accident occurred. And I think that perspective on the way that Jack's life unfolded and the way that the Babalon working unfolding has been kind of missed by a lot of people.
Why is that? I mean, we sort of know the story. If you take Crowley, for example, that his first few biographers, well, not his first few, but the middle few biographers, they were kind of like hatchet jobs, right? They were sort of very lurid and so on. And so he had sympathetic ones to begin with, including himself, and then after. Is something, why do we think this about Jack? What happened?
Well, I think the central problem is that Jack is both the lure that draws people to thelema in the modern world, and he's also the kryptonite. Because when you examine Jack's life, Jack's held up as this kind of blazing star of thelema, and he wrote these very accessible essays. I mean, people struggle with Crowley, but reading the essays in Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword, Jack's got this very modern voice. He reads like a modern. He's calling for freedom and liberty and a sexual revolution in a way that people respond to in a really deeply, powerfully emotional level. But Jack also turns away from O.T.O, and he abandons the cult in no uncertain terms and strikes out on his own path. So my feeling is that within O.T.O, it's much more convenient to characterize Jack as a risk-taking failure and an example of how not to do things, rather than dealing with the problematic aspect of him, which is he produced a text. Well, if you accept the text, then it derails Crowley's thesis of the Book of the Law. If you accept his life and his findings, then he says thelema is fine, but O.T.O is not the way in which to pursue this. And so there are vested interests who control the copyright, who have problems if they try to honestly tell the story of Jack. So I think there's some institutional bias. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think it's necessarily entirely deliberate, but Jack's story, when told correctly, is hugely problematic for O.T.O. As Jack said, the problem with magic is that it's losing the ideas war, and the reason it's losing the ideas war is it doesn't have simplicity. It can't say what it is. And if you stay wedded to Crowley and you stay wedded to his entire corpus, it's very difficult to move forwards, because you're dragging this enormous weight of material with you, this enormous weight of ideology. And as we move into an age where people are either discarding ideology and moving past it, or becoming a new form of Puritans, Jack's quite a challenge. So there's also the problem that a lot of the material around Jack hasn't been published effectively. So you can find a lot of the extraneous Jack material online, but a lot of it is still unpublished. So it's very difficult for people to form an effective picture of what went on, because it's sitting in archives, and because it's sitting in archives, people can't grasp it. I mean, even a simple text like "freedom is a two-edged sword," and I've banged on about this before, which always gets me in trouble with the O.T.O people who I have to ask for permissions to quote this material from. It's out of print. It's been out of print for, I think, almost 20 years when I looked at my copy, and that's unforgivable. That's unforgivable.
It's a really good point. I mean, I don't, to my memory, I don't think I'd read a Manifesto of the Antichrist until your book, and so
I think it's the first publication. I think it's the first publication of that material. Obviously, the crazy situation is that you can find a lot of this material online, and it's sitting there in the cloud, but it's still within copyright. So to publish it, you have to go through the official copyright holders, and they seem a little reticent to provide that material, which is a shame, because I think they have a duty to make this material available. And it's hard for me to speculate. I'm a publisher. I know how hard it is to get out material. I know there's a huge stack of Crowley material that hasn't been worked through by O.T.O, but it would be nice if they could just simply admit that they don't have the resources to do it and let someone put it out properly.
Yeah. It's especially when it's funny when it's something like the O.T.O, because if you ask them for permission, you're going to get like a no on the copyright. But it's like, dude, all your secret stuff is up on the internet. Like, what? It's such a fascinating, like, so this allegedly secret order whose secrets are all on the internet, as is all the copyrighted material. If you try to do the right thing, it doesn't come out. A lot of that, as you say, there's that's,
I mean, there's a classic kind of catch with that. So people think that all the Jack material is out, and it isn't. There's one essay that I know that the O.T.O have, but the problem is that Jack's compiled it out of all the secret grades, so they can't release it, because to do so would be to publish the grade secrets. So it probably won't ever see the light of day, despite the fact that all of the grade material is available to anyone with access to Google. So it's an impossible snarl, you know. And you know, I want to be clear. I mean, I don't want to bash O.T.O because I'm not part of O.T.O. You know, it's not in my interest. Like I don't care what O.T.O does, and to give them credit, they have granted me permission to publish some pieces, but they have some weird ideas about what I think about them. So my discussions with Bill Breeze are tense, shall we say, based on his received idea of what I think or what I'm trying to do. So it's a frustration for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I don't care either way either. I nothing the O.T.O. I have no dog in that hunt at all.
Sure.
But so I think you're right. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's a couple of it's a lack of resources. It's a sort of personalities that go into an organization like that are naturally suspicious of the sort of personalities who eject themselves from organizations like that, and then it's sort of caught up in a lack of resources, and there's a bunch of things that is just frustrating, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I am in a Jack Parsons position. what I'm saying is what Jack found, which is if you have contact with Babalon, it breaks O.T.O. I mean, it breaks it. It disintegrates. The second that anyone attains in O.T.O. and establishes contact, the system disintegrates. And that happened in Crowley's lifetime. If you look at examples like Frater Akkad, or I don't know, even Norman Mudd, I mean, all of Crowley's disciples, the second that they actually get results and things start to happen and they start to produce material, Crowley expels them.
Yeah,
it's an impossible situation. And I'm not the first person to say this. So when you look at the records of Agape Lodge, so Agape Lodge was the O.T.O. lodge in California that Jack belonged to. And at the time of Crowley's death, it was the only functioning O.T.O. lodge in the world. And the individuals who were there, there were some quite remarkable individuals, but the discussions they were having were very clear. O.T.O. was not the vehicle to spread Thelema. It didn't work. This Masonic vehicle was the wrong tool for the job, and they were all clear about that. This was obvious in the 1940s, and now obviously we're sitting in 2020, and as you say, I think the personality types that are drawn to the order structures tend to be conservative. They tend to be a little bit aspy. So it's very difficult for them to deal with the fact that when you have contact, when you have revelation, you go off the map. The second in thelemic terms people achieve knowledge and conversation, the order is no use to them. So it's a real bind.
Yeah. It's useful, I think, because you kind of mentioned Frater Akkad, and that's a good example. One of the things that I've always liked about yours and Alcestis's work, apart from everything, is this is where, for me, it was one of the things that's always haunted me about that led to things like starships, is that real Terence McKenna idea that you can see the kind of kinesis of history, right? So when we're talking about Crowley, and we're talking about Parsons, and this sort of 120-year span that happens to coincide with becoming an interplanetary species at the same time, right? You can kind of, if you step back and don't get into that sort of frog pond squabbling of who has what, you can in fact see this pattern of contact and a very clear trajectory out into space, which is there in their own foundational texts anyway. And it's the sort of, there's a cosmic historian's frustration at this challenge, because it's like, so yes, we publish the Parsons material and all your secrets, which are already out, great secrets, will also come out. But it in fact verifies the macro, it provides veracity for the macro narrative that you allege to situate yourselves in, which is this kind of stellar telos, I think.
Yeah. And there have been attempts to kind of like draw that out further. And that's what we see. That's probably the best thing that you can pull from Kenneth Grant. I mean, Grant's an incredible, snarl of absolute madness. But the one thing that he gets right is that he looks to the stellar. He looks to make that contact. He understands that Thelema is a stellar religion, and we're moving into, as you say, we are becoming an interplanetary civilization. And in order to become an interplanetary civilization, we have to turn once more to the stars.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just seems to be in there. That's there. I mean, it's literally there with Jack. That's why I think everyone's perennially fascinated by this rocket man who is also in a stellar cult. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, what he does very much with the reception of Libra 49, he looking at the methodology, he's using something called a ritual sequence called Libra Nu, which is one of the AA rites, where you go into the desert, rather like in the Book of the Law, and you inflame yourself in prayer, and you gain contact by going under the night stars, and engaging in a sexual rite under the night stars. And I know that you've done something similar to this. And I think that this is something that magicians have always found as a method, which is going out into an isolated place, spending time under the stars, and gaining that stellar contact, because we're here to go. And it's that Jack does, which results in his his reception of the book, his reception of Libra 49. And that's a technology which is really bare and is available for all of us to use.
It is, and one of the things it's and what I love about this is you give Jack the treatment that like Tobias Churton's given to Crowley, in the sense of like, I'm going to critique in a fair way Jack's writing style, right? Because there's a line in the book which I really love, which is Jack's work belongs at the crossroads of two fundamentally disreputable genres, channeled texts and science fiction, right? And one of the things that I really resonated with and thought was just brilliant in the book, hadn't occurred to me, was that it was Jack's understanding of the new world, of Hollywood, that and that's in his imaginal. He was reading as a kid and as an adult science fiction as he's doing all this stuff, and there's the swirl of maybe the first idea for solid state fuel came from, which again is in the book, from reading science fiction. It's this and doing that, situating or emerging from the imaginal that is the human contemplation of who we are in relation to space, makes him profoundly invitational, I think. One of the things I found, one of the ways I came into the text is I read a biography of the editor of Astounding, which was the big science fiction magazine of the time, and I was aware that rather than concentrating simply on Jack's writing, there was this whole what I come to call the Babalon Apocrypha, which is this wider web of texts which Jack was part of. So there's this massive science fiction writing which hugely influenced him. As you say, the solid state fuel that took us to the moon, that Jack invented as a result of him reading a story called Crucible of Power in 1939. And then when you look at the way that he relates to Babylon, that comes from a reading of another essay by the same writer, Jack Williamson, called Darker Than You Think. So these kind of texts kind of fill in a lot of the gaps around Jack. If you understand and situate him within his milieu, you suddenly find that there's a web of science fiction writers and radical thinkers who are all coming to these ideas and are all kind of dipping in and out. You find that half of them have attended a Gnostic mass. You find that they've all sat around with Jack, and he's recited the hymn to Pan to them. And there's a huge crossover with the radical thinkers of science fiction, and with this embedded sense of where Jack is as we come into the modern, as we understand ourselves as people who have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, which is a real challenge that I want people to wrestle with again, rather than seeing witchcraft and magic as something which is situated in the past, which is something that all of our authority is to be found in the past. I want us to say, well, yes, there is ancestry, there is the old spirits in the land, but there's also the future, there's also space, there's also these things that our ancestors were concerned with. And I think Jack is an incredible figure to think with, because he's struggling to articulate this, and in doing so he's probably the first of the writers in magic to do this, to have this voice, and he isn't always great. I mean, he's limited. He's dyslexic. He's an autodidact. He's obviously a smart guy, but he's reading a lot of science fiction. He's watching Hollywood movies. I read very carefully Songs for the Witch Woman, which is his poetry collection, which Marjorie Cameron illustrated and which Fulger put out. And
I mean, the poetry's awful. As a writer and a poet, like, it's dreadful. I mean, Jack is not a good poet, but you find elements of his magic embedded within the poems that he wrote, and you also find elements of the pulp science fiction and the fantasy and the films that he was watching in a period. So I also kind of looked at film release dates, and this didn't make the book, but I had a look at like what might Jack have been watching at a drive-in in Hollywood. You know, what are the influences in the culture that he's feeding on, because he's very modern. He's cutting all of these things together, and I think that's a fascinating stage that we're all heirs to. We're all in this strange world that Jack saw and created, and that the pulps envisaged, where we're both very much in the future, but we're still carrying with us all of these mythic ideas. Even in the early versions of Scientology, when Scientology was Dianetics, before it became Scientology, Hubbard was talking about the Norns, the three fates. He was talking about, you know, the demon circuit. He was talking about these magical and these ancient ideas, and then putting them alongside the most cutting edge, you know, science of mind that was available at the time. So yeah, that's my kind of rant. So Jack tries very hard as a writer, and he fails a lot, but he's readable. And for many people, I think Jack is a great way into magic.
He's definitely readable, and you get what is certainly absent these days, but you get the absolute somewhere in between anarchism and libertarianism of the message that every man and every woman is a star. Like Jack is very, you see it in Manifesto of the Antichrist and other stuff. Jack lived that philosophy. Yeah. He was. There's a book that's really important for this. It's one that Elon Musk recommended, and then obviously sold out everywhere on ABE. But you can get a crappy version of it by a guy called William Bolitho, and it's called 12 Against the Gods. And it's a series of biographies of famous people, some of whom turn up in Jack's own past life regressions. And what Bolitho does is Bolitho gives this real sense of he gives this clarion call of people to be an adventurer, to live a life as an adventurer, to go after it, and to take part in the great game of life. And that sense what really went round at Agape Lodge. I mean, everyone was reading 12 Against the Gods. I mean, it's a really critical text for them. And Jack encapsulates that. And so does Hubbard. And you see the way that Hubbard's tales as an adventurer, and you know, half of which obviously are invented, but he and Jack kind of like knocked against each other and forced each other to greater and greater heights of this, because they were saying, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to live? What does it mean to be in the world? And they went after it. And I think one of the things that people can really take away from Jack and his example is to fucking get after it. Get after it. If you want to be a magician, if you want to play this game, then you're going to have to live a life as an adventurer. And that's going to have great successes, and it's going to have great dangers and great rewards. But if you're going to do it, then do it. Yep. Amen to that. It's I think Jack, and we should come back to Hubbard in a minute, but you mentioned reincarnation. And again, this is something, I mean, I've read my Crowley. This book made explicit, and it's just, I think it's another example of contemporary Crowleyites of all stripes not really doing any magic. But reincarnation was a bigger deal to Crowley, and then because we go into Hubbard and Parsons in the book, of course, then I guess his erstwhile proponents would think. Like, it's actually a big part of Crowley's own development, and consequently a stringent recommendation of, you got to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely huge. The past life material has dropped completely out of vogue, which is crazy. I I'm not sure whether it's because of the influence of spiritualism and people stepping back from it, but I think it's largely people not doing the work. I mean, if you look at Crowley, one of his critical texts is Libra Bereshith, and Libra Bereshith is a series of exercises in order to begin thinking backwards, and therefore to travel back in time and to recapture one's past lives. And having recaptured them, you build the chain and move into the future. But without having created this chain of ancestry, you can't do magic. I mean, Crowley is absolutely explicit about this and the importance of this. And this was something that informed Gerald Gardner as well, and Wicca. And I talk about this as well in the book, that Wicca, I think, has lost it too. Reincarnation was, and the study of past lives was absolutely central to the practice of magic. And so I hope that people will also read the book and start to consider that, and start to engage in their own experiments in terms of discovering, where did they come from? Who were they before? And also to take perhaps my recommendation that we should pursue that even further into who were we before we were human, and to understand that connection to that greater web of life, rather than simply deciding that we were Cleopatra in a past life.
I will say Crowley's regression technique isn't I struggle with it. I think take the spirit of it, which is you must do your reincarnation past life work. And I think, again, it's over 100 years old, but if you look at some of the inductions and regressions you can do today, that can accomplish the same thing. Because Crowley's sort of think backwards until you get to birth and then just keep thinking. It's like, all right, I'll give that a shot, but do you have a backup? And I wonder if that's part of it. I wonder if he was that much more talented than everyone else.
Yeah.
That he's like, oh, you just think backwards into your previous life. I'm like, do you though, Eddie?
I think one of the big problems with Crowley is he assumes that everyone has his particular mental strengths. I mean, Crowley was incredibly good with his visualization. And the reason that he was good with his visualization, not only did he go through the Golden Dawn system, but also when he encountered Oscar Ecclestein, I'm probably mangling his surname, but he instructed Crowley in this process of really increasingly complex visualizations. And Crowley also was a chess player, was used to engaging in this three-dimensional visualization process. So Crowley's got immense mental powers, and he assumes that everyone else has them or can develop them, and that really isn't the case. So you're entirely correct, as there are far better inductions, and there are far better ways of doing this that have been picked up by the New Age, for example, that haven't made it across to magic, because we're still somewhat phobic about these things. One of the things that I found useful, I'm not sure if you've experimented with, Gordon, is flotation tanks. I've had a series of quite radical past life experiences with flotation, and also with flotation with the ingestion of hashish. Those two combined produce some quite intense past life experiences that I wasn't hunting for at the time, but I subsequently went after.
Yeah, that's nice. No, I've done flotation tanks, but I haven't used them in a past life context. I've done, and I've shared this when we did the Spiritualism and Ancestors course. There's a Brian Weiss induction, which I use. I'm talking like Hay House. You want to talk New Age? This is a Hay House, or he is an MD, etc., and it works a treat as a self-induction for anyone who's even just slightly kicked the tires on magic. You can take something like that and run with it. As you say, you can get those, you can have the regression, get those memories, and then they can become, the foundational memories for additional journeying or whatever else needs to happen. But I was really impressed at kind of seeing where, and this comes back to that, I can see the living current move through the 20th century, and it's not where people think it is. Like, you talk about Gardner, and everyone well, not everyone, maybe they don't, but most people, I think, who listen to a show like this would be aware that we wouldn't have Gardnerian Wicca were it not for Crowley, were it not for Thelema. It is, in many respects, it's not even just downstream, particularly after, the Babalon Workings, etc., or at least Libra 49. These things are its fulfillment, and these things are a fulfillment or progression from it. If anything, in Jack's work, is situated in that same kind of like aeonic structure, and I think it is as the Book of the Law, right? And the thing that what this book is about, which is amazing, and it's almost cheeky, but it's bigger than that. It's just audacious. Is that so is Scientology? Like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Hubbard is consistently like undervalued. Clearly, the problem with Hubbard is he's got the classic dark personality triad. He's an absolute narcissist. He's a psychopath. He's a liar. I mean, the guy lies at such an incredible speed, and with such so extensively. It's very easy to write him off. But he spent his entire life trying to develop a new science of mind, and he spent his life pursuing people who could give him information about that. And so Hubbard's absolutely, he did something remarkable, even if I don't think that the tech that he produced is all that good. He engaged in this experiment, and he pushed it very hard. So there are some notably useful things in Scientology. Like, they looked at the past life regression. You look at the people who've used Scientology, and the early material has been very powerful for them, whether that's William Burroughs or whether it's Charles Manson or whether it's, whoever you want to pick. People who've come into contact with his work have gone, there really is something here, which is why a lot of people who leave Scientology continue to try and practice it as squirrels. There is an open source Scientology movement out there. But I think Hubbard's a good example. Hubbard's an example in that sense of the direction that magic could have gone in and still can, because rather than trying to create a closed boundary cult, so I think an organization like O.T.O, there's a place for people who want to do rote Masonic initiations. That's one thing. You want to join a German sex cult and do that, then knock yourself out. But equally, there's a more radical work called, well, let's strip ourselves free of all these things, and then let's look at what all of the radicals are doing across the New Age, across magic, across science, and let's see what we can do to develop our human potential. Where can we take this, people? Where can we take this? And the place that we have to take it is to the furthest reaches of space. This is our new frontier. Our new frontier is becoming a multiplanetary species. And if we wish to do that, then we need to use all the tools that are available to us, rather than excluding things because we're frightened of them or we feel they might be foolish.
Yeah, no argument there. You join a hyperdimensional conspiracy of radicals. Like, it's once you shift that theory of mind, you can do it. You can actually just be like, I am in alignment with, etc. Like, finish that sentence, right? And I think I agree completely. And it turns it into an electric and urgent because it is urgent, but like an electric and urgent opportunity or response to despair, which I think is also very timely.
Yeah. I think humanity has lost its way in a huge way. I think we've ended up in this mess of cynicism and despair and hopelessness because we don't know why we're here, and we don't know where we're going. And there's a sense of of helplessness. There's a sense of just like endless disaster upon disaster looming over us. And the antidote for that is to say, no, we're on the verge of becoming an interplanetary species, but we will only do that if we make that our aim as a species. If we devote our thinking to how we do that, how we survive in space, how we bring ourselves forward, how we understand not only our common humanity, but the duty that we owe to all life. And the duty that we owe to all life is to go off world, because we're on a very, very fragile arc. Whether you agree with my projections about global cataclysm or not, on the timeline that we're on, the Earth will be destroyed. And so we have to go to space. If we want life to exist, if you want to carry life with us, then we need to do that. And I think magicians are some of the radical thinkers who can be pushing us in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the taking life with you always interests me, because it kind of, I'm paraphrasing Terence McKenna here, but he basically said that if like the basil or the banana wanted to get to Mars, it's faster for the plant kingdom to kind of grow up a monkey, because it's already spent the millions of years getting, its fingers, and it's a biped and what have you. So that kind of the plant kingdom and the chemical effects of plant sugars and all that kind of stuff on the brain, it's quicker for so the interplanetary plan could have come from the banana, is kind of his point. But it's that very really lyrical Terence way of saying we do this as a community of beings. We don't do this as humans.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think about a lot in these terms is looking at the fallen angels myth, surprisingly enough. So I'm not sure how many people read Milton anymore, but when you read Paradise Lost, it begins with Lucifer or Satan and the fallen angels all in absolute disarray, having been mightily smited by God. So we're in a post-war broken landscape, and they're going, we're doomed, we're fucked, it's all gone wrong, we've lost. And the spirit of Lucifer is to say no, after the fall there's the ascent, there's the return. And we're at the stage where, rather than like moping around saying we're fallen, everything is lost, oh my God, we're in matter, the answer is to say no, we're actually at the stage where we're beginning the ascent, we're beginning the conquest of space. We're not simply visiting and returning in an arms race with the Russians. We are actually going to have to become a multiplanetary species, and we're doing it for all life. We need to take all life with us. We need to have that vision that we're not going to Mars so that a few fucking billionaires can stay there while the last few people die on a poisoned Earth. That's a nonsense idea. What we're doing is we need to try to create an arc. We need to create that grail, and we need to take the blood to the heavens, and we need to spread out into the universe. This is the Luciferian plan.
It is the Luciferian plan, and it is also, I would say, the this is a take. I can't point to Milton for this. If I think humanity completes its destiny that began with panspermia when we become the pansperm. So correct. This is, I think, it may well be how life moves through the universe. It crucibles up from like a squishy rock hitting it to becoming interplanetary and spreading. And that's over, it's interesting that it's kind of like to take your place, to take mankind's place back amongst the gods, is to do what gods do, which is, create worlds. And there's just something about it that, and I love it. I love it on a hyperdimensional level or a mythic level, where at every stage in history, all cultures, wherever, are we're just out of relation with the stars. However you want to call it, we're just out of relation with the stars. And we have this idea like all over the planet of it being the place of our ancestors and the place of our becoming. So the shamanic training I'm doing at the moment, you're talking about we're magicians are used to the underworld and the earth and being from here, and it's true. And the sort of three-world model of the Kero has the underworld as the underworld as we'd understand it, but it's the place of where we come from, and the upper world is an upper world as we would understand it in a shamanic sense, but it's also the place of our becoming. So there's a kinesis in the three-world model of the Kero, which is going from under the earth to on top of the earth to out into space, and it's still that kind of three-world thing. And this is our, I guess, what I want to say, like our version of this. What I mean is, this is both unprecedented, what you're saying, and precedented.
Yeah, it's clear that this is what we have to do. You know, there is this is the mission. I mean, people need to understand that this is what we need to do, and magicians play a crucial role in this, because we're the radical thinkers. You know, it's up to us to have these wild and crazy ideas, and we are at the fringes of culture, and we're going to get things wrong. We're also going to get things right. But what we do by dreaming of this, what we do by projecting into this, what we do by writing this, is we make this real.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so Jack is the model, right? Because you're saying there that he's reading him to Pan, to like all these aspiring Hollywood hack sci-fi writers and so on, and the cross-pollination that goes on when you allow thoughts to be beings, or at least to be situated in something that's alive, like the imaginal, means that everyone is in this game, right? I know you're in the book saying what we need to do, which is true. What we need to do is get our people into JPL, et cetera, et cetera. That's the Scientology model, I point out. But everyone's in this game because you have an imaginal. You are embedded in the psyche. You are embedded in the context that we're talking about.
Yeah, and what would you like it to look like? I mean, magicians, are you just going to talk shit about Elon Musk, or are you going to recite the hymn to Pan every time he launches a rocket? Because I know which one's more effective in getting the space that we want, rather than a military industrial complex bullshit future.
Totally. I'm suddenly realizing my Doge holdings would go really well with a hymn to Pan. So I'm going to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is no point. So I'm sure that people will continue to, find ways to criticize my work. So let me put this on record, so people have got a stick to beat me with. I am delighted with what Elon Musk is doing. If Jack Parsons were alive today, he would be absolutely working at SpaceX and with Elon Musk. 1000%. No other way. No, there is no way around that. But in saying that, I'm also saying I don't think we should have fucking billionaires. I'm horrified that it takes a fucking Elon Musk to accumulate this much capital to try to create the Mars project. This shouldn't be being done by a billionaire, but that's what we fucking got. That's what we've got. So rather than talking shit about Elon, I think we need to say, how can we transform this? How can we gain control of the space program? And the way we do it as magicians is we gain control of the imaginal.
Yeah, I'm into it. I suddenly never occurred to me where Jack would be working. It would be SpaceX, unless Bigelow paid him to be on that kind of weird UFO study group or something. But otherwise, yeah, it'd totally be Elon.
Yeah, I think Cameron would have ended up with Bigelow. She was a little untethered, shall we say.
Yeah, that's true. I wouldn't I'm joking saying that was the Scientology model, but it was. And I think one of the things that I learned from this book, which is really useful, is because, again, Hubbard was a liar, and he'd say things like he was there trying to, naval intelligence sent him to break up a black magic cult in Hollywood. But actually, he had some pretty good magical skills. Like, I'd never heard of Hubbard's affirmations or admissions, right? But pick that up for us.
Okay, so one of the interesting things that I was looking at, because of the lack of core material from Jack, largely because Cameron lost it all or had it destroyed by one of her partners. I mean, his records are really fragmentary as a result of her fractured life more than anything. As a result, I I started asking questions like, where was Hubbard while Jack was in the desert receiving Libra 49? What was Hubbard doing? Like there's a period where Hubbard is off somewhere. And so I read the biographies of Hubbard. I looked at what Hubbard was doing, and Hubbard was producing this strange document, which can be found online if you look for it. That's called the Affirmations. It has a couple of names. It doesn't have an official title. Where he locked himself in a hotel room with a sound scriber machine, which is one of these ways you used to be able to record onto a vinyl disc. And he recorded a series of these affirmations to try and cure himself of a variety of things. So he's doing the kind of thing you see on Instagram when people post a tile with 10 groovy affirmations they want to happen. But with Hubbard, he crosses over into magic. He describes himself as an adept. He describes what he's doing in terms of invocations. He's clearly engaged in a magical process of self-reprogramming. So again, to draw another wildly unpopular figure into this, he's self-authoring in the way that Jordan Peterson is trying to bootstrap all the broken incels into. He's trying to rebuild his life by reprogramming himself. And Affirmations is a series of these things, but it's magic. He's not differentiating between the psychological work and the magical work. He's engaged in both at the same time. So Affirmations is a sprawling, crazy, half psychotic, half visionary document that goes through his process of doing it. And because he's writing it to himself rather than for an audience, it's very honest.
Yeah, that's true. And I think what I liked about it, again, looking at the sort of process or flow, you can read in that document that he clearly was a magician, right? In the sense that he knew the right terms and he was obviously doing things. Like it wasn't just him dicking about with Jack.
No, absolutely.
And you kind of see that in his, and consequently, so he is a magician at the base, whatever you think of Scientology, he's the magician at the base of a hugely a Thelemish magician at the base of a hugely successful project.
Yeah. I mean, the reason that Hubbard gets dismissed so quickly is that Crowley wrote a letter saying that oh my God, Jack's being taken in by a typical confidence trickster. And so it's very easy for people to go, oh yes, Hubbard was a confidence trickster, Jack was the magician. And it's like, well, no, Jack describes Hubbard as the most thelemic individual he's ever met.
And that kind of bears out. I mean, who else is going to die on a boat surrounded by cult members, you know?
Yeah. So Hubbard has done these things. Hubbard has had his angelic contact, you know. So when he was a young man, he would have this image of an angel appear on the wing of his glider when he was in trouble flying, and he had a relationship with this kind of like guide or angel that he then pursued through some seance work with another science fiction writer. And so by the time he turns up at the parsonage at Orange Grove Drive, he's been posing as a Swami in Los Angeles. He's got a background as an adventurer. He's done a ton of magic adjacent things. And then he sits down with Jack, and Jack's lit up with Crowley at this stage. And they're both talking. Jack's framing all of Hubbard's experiences for Hubbard in these thelemic terms. And Hubbard goes for it. Hubbard is absolutely mad for Crowley and continues to be. And this is something that gets missed as well, because Scientology obviously don't want to talk about Crowley, and the Thelemites don't want to talk about Scientology. So it falls into this kind of like dead space. But when you crawl through Hubbard's material, which I have done, you see that Crowley breaks the surface consistently through Hubbard's life. It's not he sees Jack, rips Jack off, and then forms a crazy cult in order to make money. No, that isn't what happens. Hubbard meets Jack. It's a significant moment in his life. he has his experiences reframed within terms of Crowley, and then he goes on and reads and pursues Crowley's work and frames himself privately, not within the cult. He doesn't create Scientology as Thelema, but his personal spiritual progress is exactly framed within the terms of Thelema.
Yeah, and he does keep erupting into his life to the point that he would lie about it. Like, I didn't know. He lied about getting close to Crowley memorabilia when he was in London and all this kind of stuff. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, when so that was in 1950, I think early 1952. So this is like, 6 years after the Babalon Working. Hubbard says that while he was in London, that he'd managed to handle some of Crowley's objects, and he's obviously got he's got his own personal copy of Magic in Theory and Practice, because he makes a mistake and calls the book the Master Therion. And the reason that he calls Magic in Theory and Practice the Master Therion is it has the Master Therion written in huge letters on the edition of the book that he has. And he refers to Crowley publicly in lectures on tape in 1952 as my friend Aleister Crowley. My friend Aleister Crowley. And then he goes on to describe himself as the Prince of Darkness in the same lecture, in the same way that Crowley had framed himself as the B666. Crowley, Hubbard jokes that he is the Prince of Darkness. And he continues this dark joking throughout his life. He's taken a massive imprint from Aleister, and he actually believes that upon Aleister's death, that he is somehow the heir to Crowley. And this is a madness that we see consistently through history. I mean, people like Leary thought that he was a reincarnation of Crowley. You see, I'm not sure whether Genesis thought he was or not, but there's definitely a sense that he's continuing Crowley's work. But he's continuing Crowley's work in a personal capacity, not in terms of Scientology. Scientology isn't like a secret future version of O.T.O.
No, that is quite important, isn't it? So Hubbard's understanding of Crowley's work formed the framework for his personal spiritual development, and the side effect of that, or the outflowing, like the business side of that, was a very wealthy globe spanning cult that could buy boats and whatever. Yeah See, I think I wasn't sure what I was expecting going into the book, but it's electrifying, as your books always are. I knew I expected that, but it's so useful for people, I think, to sit with the idea that these things are alive, like history is alive, and where you think the current went isn't actually where it went. And it does, as you say, it doesn't mean let's all become Scientologists, or even, because it went to Gardnerian Wicca, it went all these other places at that pivot point that's there in Libra 49. It's sort of it's a bend or an arc in the Tesla coil, right? Where it's astounding, because if you look at history from like as something that's alive, and the images and motifs and ideas that can move, you can be like, well, shit, because everyone's like, well, what are the net effects of Crowley? And we sort of know, everyone can say the Beatles and other such things, but hang on, there's this ballooning enormous. What cults did we talk about that didn't kill people en masse more than Scientology at the end of the 20th century?
There were all of these. There are many children to the Babalon Working. That it goes in various different directions, and Gardnerian Wicca is an important thing that people have overlooked. I think partly because they're not English, and they don't have the experience of knowing people who have worked within Gardnerian Wicca. They've just seen an American version of it, so it's very easy to rubbish Wicca. When in fact there are many different Wiccas, and there are some very, very interesting things in it. And the quotes that I lift from Gardner and put in the book, they could be Jack Parsons. They absolutely could be written by Jack rather than rather than being within Wicca. And I think it's useful for people to reassess that and get a sense of the spirit of that age, because it was radical. Wicca was a radical thing, and I think we need to recapture that sense of radicalism in magic, and rather than endlessly harping on about a supposed tradition, we need to be radical thinkers, and as radical thinkers we need to look at unpopular things, which is why in this podcast I've said Elon Musk, I've said Jordan Peterson. Why are these people unspeakable? Why are these people unspeakable in our culture? Because we need to continue to push the magical current forward, and that means we need to learn from everyone, and we need to know that things have split. We need to appreciate Scientology.
I'm into it.
And we need to appreciate O.T.O. We need to appreciate the drama of some of the O.T.O. rituals and initiations. There's real power in there. And again, the Jack that's revealed when you read his work, when you read the Manifesto of the Antichrist, this is a profoundly anti-Christian, antinomian, breaking of norms approach to the world. It's a really powerful thing. And many people are going to be uncomfortable when they read that.
Definitely. We more people now than say a decade or more ago. I mean, the Manifesto of the Antichrist is against structures and all that real Crowley stuff. Like it is a radical burn it down anarchism, right?
Yeah. And I think as we seem to be pivoting, or a section of the world seems to be pivoting to a new Puritanism and a new sense of inflexible ideological thinking, the radical thinkers, the people who are actual Thelemites, need to say, no, enough of this, enough compelled speech, enough compelled thought, enough ideology, enough fucking backdoor Christianity. We will not stand for this. We stand for freedom.
Hear, Mr. Gray. Well, I think we've given the book a good and thorough going over. Is there anything else we want to talk about that's in it before we wind this up? Do we want to talk? This one has tech at the back, which I'm excited to play with.
Yeah. So for people who've listened to this podcast and are a little adrift, this is a very readable account of the Babalon Working in a way that you will not have understood it before. So if you've read something like The Red Goddess, you will be able to read this book. You might get lost in some of the technical material, but you can find your way through it. So this is a mature piece of writing. This is my 50th year. So for me, this is a work that ties together many of the themes that people will be familiar with from The Red Goddess, Apocalyptic Witchcraft, and Lucifer Princeps. Like this is a critical work for me in terms of my thinking. So it begins with an ecological imperative. It then tells the Babalon Working, and then it gives a sequence of rituals in the back for people to explore and work with. So it does a lot of things. It's not a super easy book. This isn't a beginner text, but this is a text that I think people will be able to grapple with, and will hopefully point some new directions for people in their own practice and lives, and in orienting themselves in a world where we need to become multiplanetary, where magic needs to once again look to the stars and journey there. We need to be the advance guard in this, and I hope that this book gives people a sense of how they can do that, how they can approach that, and how they can live lives of freedom and meaning by learning from the adventures and misadventures, not only of Jack Parsons, but also of Lafayette Ron Hubbard.
Perfect. Perfect. And where can they find you, Mr. Gray?
They can't find me because I'm not present online, but Scarlet Imprint is. So you can find the book at scarletimprint.com. We maintain an Instagram page as our only kind of like social media. I think social media is like a terrible place to be personally. So yeah, scarletimprint.com. The book's available in digital, paperback, fancy editions, depending on what you feel is necessary for you in your life.
Wonderful. Always a pleasure, sir.
No, wonderful to talk to you, Gordon, and thank you for pushing the work of magic forward, because I think we're all engaged in a dialogue now rather than being locked in silos of orders. I think this is where the conversation is happening.